A CEO thought she was feeding his son poison, but what she is actually doing will shatter everything he believes. He walks into his own kitchen and sees the new nanny crushing strange herbs into his sick child's soup. Fear takes over. He fires her on the spot, no questions asked. But hours later, the boy suddenly crashes, and doctors can't explain why. That's when the CEO learns the terrifying truth. The woman he pushed away may be the only person alive who knows how to keep his son breathing. And worse, someone dangerous is hunting her, determined to stop her from helping anyone ever again. Now the clock is ticking, and the truth behind those herbs could save a life, or destroy them both. Will he find her in time? Or did his mistake cost him the one person who could save his child? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The autumn wind rattled the windows of Santiago Drayton's Tesla as he pulled into his driveway earlier than usual. The sleek black vehicle seemed out of place against the warm brick colonial home, much like how he felt out of place leaving work before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But after that disastrous board meeting, he needed the comfort of home, needed to see Micah's smile. His shoes crunched against fallen leaves as he made his way to the front door, briefcase in hand. The weight of the day's frustrations hung heavy on his shoulders. 3 hours of defending his company's latest project to skeptical investors had left him drained. All he wanted was a quiet evening with his son, maybe helping with homework or playing one of their favorite board games. The house was unusually quiet when he entered. Santiago loosened his tie, following the faint sound of movement coming from the kitchen. The familiar scent of chicken soup, his late wife Maria's recipe, wafted through the air. But there was something else, something earthier, unfamiliar. His steps quickened. He reached the kitchen doorway and stopped dead in his tracks. His 6-year-old son sat at the counter, watching intently as the new nanny, Nia Harper, stood over a steaming bowl. Her hands moved with practiced precision, crushing what looked like dark green leaves into Micah's soup. Santiago's heart jumped to his throat. "What are you doing?" His voice boomed through the kitchen, making both Nia and Micah jump. Nia's hands froze mid-motion, her eyes widening as she took in Santiago's thunderous expression. "Mr. Drayton, I can explain. Get away from my son." Santiago strode forward, placing himself between Nia and Micah. His mind raced with horrifying possibilities. What had she been feeding his child? His already fragile child? "Daddy?" Micah's small voice quivered behind him. Miss Nia was just... His words dissolved into a fit of coughing, the sound hitting Santiago like a physical blow. The coughing only intensified Santiago's panic. He whirled on Nia, who had taken a step back, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "What did you put in his food?" he demanded, voice sharp with fear and anger. "They're just herbs, Mr. Drayton," Nia said, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "Thyme and sage, mainly. They're completely safe, I promise. They help with..." "Safe?" Santiago cut her off, his fear morphing into rage. "You don't decide what's safe for my son. You don't experiment with his food. He has a medical condition." Micah's coughing subsided, but Santiago barely registered it, too focused on the woman who had betrayed his trust. He'd hired her just last week, after thorough background checks and glowing references. How could he have missed something so fundamental? "I understand your concern." Nia tried again, her brown eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and determination. "But these are natural remedies that can help with inflammation. I would never do anything to harm Micah." Santiago shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. "You're fired," he said, the words coming out cold and final. "Pack your things and leave. Now." "Daddy, no!" Micah protested, his small hand tugging at Santiago's suit jacket. "Miss Nia makes me feel better. The soup helps my throat." The pleading in his son's voice almost made Santiago waver, but the memory of endless hospital visits, of watching Micah struggle to breathe during particularly bad episodes, strengthened his resolve. He couldn't take risks with his son's health. He wouldn't. Nia stood very still for a moment, her shoulders straight despite the obvious tremor in her hands. "I understand," she said quietly, though her eyes suggested otherwise. She turned to Micah, who had tears streaming down his face. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything will be fine." Santiago watched as she gathered her few belongings from the kitchen: a worn leather bag, a notebook, and what looked like a small pouch of herbs. Each movement was deliberate, dignified, even as her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "The recipe for the base soup is on the counter," she said softly, pausing at the kitchen doorway. "It's similar to your wife's, but with less sodium. It's better for Micah's condition." With that, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing through the suddenly silent house. Through the kitchen window, Santiago watched her walk down the driveway, her figure growing smaller against the darkening sky. The autumn wind whipped at her coat, but she didn't hurry her pace. Even in departure, she maintained that same calm grace that had initially impressed him during her interview. Standing alone in the kitchen, Santiago felt the first flicker of doubt. The soup still steamed on the counter, innocent-looking except for the sprinkle of green herbs floating on top. Micah had stopped crying but sat hunched at the counter, refusing to look at his father. "It's for your own good, mijo," Santiago said, more to convince himself than his son. "We can't take chances with your health." But as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. The certainty that had fueled his actions just moments ago began to crack around the edges. He looked at the recipe Nia had left, written in neat, careful handwriting, with detailed notes about ingredients that might ease Micah's inflammation. The kitchen felt colder somehow, despite the warmth from the soup pot still simmering on the stove. Santiago stood rooted to the spot, his son's quiet sniffles the only sound breaking the heavy silence. He was right to protect his son, wasn't he? He had to be right. But if that was true, why did victory feel so much like loss? The recipe paper curled slightly at the edges, moved by the same draft that rattled the windows. Outside, the sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Nia was long gone, disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving behind only questions Santiago wasn't ready to answer, and a bowl of cooling soup that might have been more than just dinner. The soup grew cold on the kitchen counter as Santiago tried to coax his son to eat something else. Micah sat slumped in his chair, pushing macaroni and cheese around his plate without taking a single bite. The boy's usual chatty demeanor had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed too profound for his 6 years. "You need to eat something, mijo," Santiago said, softening his voice. The anger from earlier had drained away, leaving him feeling hollow. "I'm not hungry," Micah mumbled, his small fingers still clutching the fork. "My tummy feels funny." Santiago leaned forward, instantly alert. "Funny how? Does it hurt?" Micah shook his head, his dark curls falling across his forehead. "Just feels wrong, like when Mommy left." The words hit Santiago like a physical blow. He reached across the table, covering his son's small hand with his own. "I know you liked Miss Nia," he began carefully, "but we have to be extra careful with your health. You understand that, right?" "But I felt good when she was here," Micah protested, finally looking up at his father. His brown eyes, so like his mother's, were filled with confusion. "The soup made the hurting stop. She said it was magic soup, like Mommy used to make." Santiago swallowed hard. The mention of Isabel's soup brought back memories of lazy Sunday afternoons, the three of them crowded in the kitchen, his wife insisting on making everything from scratch despite their well-equipped staff. "Your mother's recipes were special," he said quietly. "Miss Nia's soup tasted just like Mommy's," Micah said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "and she listened to my stories just like Mommy did." Unable to respond, Santiago stood up and began clearing the barely touched plates. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, made heavier by his son's obvious distress. But he couldn't risk Micah's health with untested remedies, no matter how well-intentioned they might be. Bedtime proved equally challenging. Micah was unusually quiet as Santiago helped him into his pajamas, the ones with little dinosaurs that usually prompted excited chatter about prehistoric facts. Tonight there were no facts, no stories, just silence. "Would you like me to read you a story?" Santiago asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Micah shook his head, clutching his stuffed triceratops closer. "Miss Nia was teaching me about plants," he said softly. "She said they could be friends if you knew them well enough." Santiago pulled the covers up to Micah's chin, trying to ignore the twist of uncertainty in his gut. "Try to get some sleep, okay?" He stayed beside the bed, running his fingers through Micah's curls until the boy's breathing evened out into sleep. Back in his home office, Santiago tried to focus on work emails, but his mind kept wandering to the past week. Micah had been more energetic, laughing more, complaining less about the constant aches that plagued him. Santiago had attributed it to a good phase in the cycle of his condition. But now, the house felt unnaturally quiet when the alarm on his phone jolted him awake at 11 o'clock. He must have dozed off at his desk. But something else had woken him, a sound from upstairs. "Daddy!" Micah's cry was weak but urgent. Santiago took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding. He found Micah tangled in his sheets, his skin burning hot to the touch. "I hurt everywhere," the boy whimpered, tears rolling down his flushed cheeks. It's okay," Santiago murmured, but fear clawed at his throat. He recognized these symptoms, the fever, the joint pain that made Micah cry out when moved. It was a severe flare-up of his inflammatory condition, worse than any in recent memory. The emergency room was brutally bright after the darkness of the night. Micah curled into himself on the hospital bed, each movement causing him to wince. Santiago paced beside him, answering the same questions over and over as different medical staff cycled through. "Has there been any change in his routine?" the emergency doctor asked, frowning at Micah's chart. Santiago started to say no, then stopped. "His nanny. She was adding herbs to his food. I fired her today when I caught her doing it." The doctor made a note. "Do you know what herbs?" "She said something about thyme and sage." Santiago ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "But I didn't let her explain further." Hours crawled by. The medication they gave Micah barely touched his fever or pain. Santiago watched helplessly as his son drifted in and out of restless sleep, occasionally whimpering for his mother, for Miss Nia, for the pain to stop. As dawn began to paint the hospital room in shades of grey, the night doctor stopped by one final time before his shift ended. "We're honestly puzzled by the severity of this flare-up," he admitted. "The inflammation markers in his blood work are much higher than his baseline. Has anything else changed recently?" Santiago stared at the IV drip slowly feeding medicine into his son's arm. In his mind, he saw Nia's gentle hands crushing herbs into the soup, heard her calm voice trying to explain. He remembered Micah's laughter this past week, the spring in his step, the decrease in complaints about pain. "What did I miss?" he whispered, the words barely audible over the steady beep of the heart monitor. His son's small face was pinched with pain even in sleep, And for the first time since that afternoon's confrontation, Santiago allowed himself to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The rising sun cast long shadows across the hospital room floor, and in them, Santiago saw his own fears, his grief, his desperate need to control everything about his son's life. But control wasn't the same as protection, and now Micah was suffering. The certainty that had driven him to fire Nia crumbled like autumn leaves in his hands, leaving behind only questions and regret. Morning light filtered through the hospital room's thin curtains, casting a pale glow on Micah's sleeping form. Santiago sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, his back aching from the long night. Dark circles shadowed his eyes as he pulled out his phone, intending to email his assistant about cancelling his meetings. A stream of unread messages caught his attention. 3 were from Maria, their housekeeper of 5 years, sent the previous evening before news of Micah's hospitalization. "Mr. Drayton, I heard about Miss Harper leaving. Please reconsider." The first message read, "Micah has been so much better since she started. I've never seen him this happy and healthy." Santiago's throat tightened as he read the second message. The joint stiffness that always troubled him in the mornings. Gone these past 2 weeks. He's been running and playing like any other child. The third message made his hands shake. "Whatever you think she did wrong, there must be an explanation. That woman has a gift with children. Please talk to her." He lowered the phone, looking at his son's pale face. The morning nurse had reported his fever still hadn't broken, and the pain medication was barely taking the edge off his discomfort. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? Without really deciding to, Santiago found himself walking to the pediatric wing. He needed answers, and Nurse Matthews had been treating Micah for years. She looked up from her station as he approached, her kind face creasing with concern. "Santiago," she said softly, "I heard about the emergency admission. How is he?" "Not good?" Santiago ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Delilah, I need to ask you something. When we came for his checkup last week, how did he seem to you?" Nurse Matthews set down her clipboard, giving him her full attention. "Honestly, I was amazed by his progress. His inflammation markers were lower than we'd seen in months. His energy levels were up. His joint mobility had improved significantly." She paused, studying Santiago's face. "I meant to ask what had changed in his routine." "Nia Harper," Santiago said, his voice rough. "The new nanny. She was adding things to his food, herbs." Understanding dawned in Delilah's eyes. "Ah, that explains it." At Santiago's sharp look, she added, "My grandmother was an herbalist. Many traditional remedies can be quite effective for inflammatory conditions, especially when properly prepared." Santiago sank into a chair, feeling the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. "I didn't even let her explain. I just saw her putting something in his food and—" "You got scared," Delilah finished gently. "You're a single father with a chronically ill child. Fear makes us react sometimes, instead of respond." Santiago checked his watch, 11:30 in the morning. "I need to find her. Get her employee file at least, understand what she was doing." He stood up. "Will you call me if there's any change with Micah?" "Of course," Delilah promised. "And Santiago, sometimes the best medicine isn't just about what goes into the body. That woman had a way with Micah. He lit up whenever she was around." The drive to Nia's apartment complex took 20 minutes. It was a modest building in a quiet neighborhood, with window boxes full of herbs on many of the balconies. Santiago found the building manager's office, where a grey-haired man looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Nia Harper's apartment?" Santiago asked. "I'm her employer. Was her employer. I need to retrieve some paperwork." The manager's eyes narrowed slightly. "Miss Harper left early this morning, paid her rent in full and turned in her keys. Sweet lady, always helping the older folks here with their aches and pains. Left." Santiago's heart sank. Did she say where she was going? Nope, just had a backpack with her. Seemed in a hurry, which wasn't like her at all. The manager stood up, keys jingling. I can let you into the apartment, though. She said someone might come by for the remaining items. The apartment was small but bright, with large windows and the lingering scent of dried herbs. Santiago's footsteps echoed in the empty space as he moved through it. The furniture was sparse, clearly rented with the unit, but the kitchen counter held several neat rows of glass jars, each carefully labelled in Nia's flowing handwriting. Turmeric root, holy basil, willow bark. Behind them stood a well-worn leather book, its pages marked with dozens of coloured tabs. Santiago opened it carefully, finding handwritten recipes for natural remedies, margin notes about dosages and combinations. This wasn't the work of someone recklessly experimenting. These were carefully researched, time-tested formulas. A manila folder sat beside the book. Inside, Santiago found newspaper clippings, court documents, and medical records. His eyes widened as he read the headlines. Local healer accused of practicing without license. Controversial case dismisses traditional medicine practitioner. Harper Healing Center forced to close. The most recent article included a photo of Nia standing outside a courthouse, her face drawn but dignified. The caption read, "Despite all charges being dropped, Harper announces closure of family practice amid continued harassment." Santiago sat heavily on one of the kitchen stools, the article trembling in his hands. He thought of how quickly she had left, taking only what she could carry in a backpack. She hadn't run because she was guilty. She had run because experience had taught her that explanation was futile, that accusations alone could destroy everything she had built. Looking around the sunlit kitchen with its carefully organized herbs and healing texts, Santiago felt the full weight of his assumptions crash down on him. He had become exactly what she feared, another person who would condemn without understanding, who would see danger instead of hope, who would choose fear over faith. The morning light caught the glass jars, making them glow like amber. Each one represented knowledge passed down through generations, healing wisdom that had been helping his son before fear and misunderstanding had torn everything apart. Now Nia was gone. Micah was suffering, and Santiago was left holding a newspaper photo that showed him exactly why she had disappeared so completely. The hospital corridors felt different in the evening, quieter somehow, with the day's bustling activity settling into a gentle hum of machines and soft footsteps. Santiago made his way back to Micah's room, his mind still swimming with everything he'd discovered in Nia's apartment. The folder he'd found weighed heavily in his briefcase, both literally and metaphorically. As he approached Micah's room, a nurse emerged, giving him a small nod. "He's been sleeping peacefully for the last hour," she whispered. "His fever's down to 101.5. "Thank you," Santiago murmured, slipping inside. The room was dimly lit, with only the soft glow of monitoring equipment and the fading sunset through half-drawn blinds. Micah looked so small in the hospital bed, his dark curls splayed across the white pillow. Various tubes and wires connected him to beeping machines, a sight that never failed to make Santiago's heart ache. He settled into the worn vinyl chair beside the bed, pulling out the folder from his briefcase. The articles inside told a complicated story. The first headline jumped out at him again. Local healer accused of medical negligence. But as he read deeper, following the chronological progression of the case, things became less clear-cut. Key witness in Harper case recants testimony. One headline declared. Another read, "Evidence suggests setup in traditional healer investigation." The final article detailed how all charges had been dropped, but by then, the damage to Nia's reputation had been done. Santiago rubbed his tired eyes, thinking about how quickly he'd jumped to conclusions in his own kitchen. He'd seen Nia adding something to Micah's soup and immediately assumed the worst. But now, looking at his son's medical charts showing the improvement during Nia's brief time with them, he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. The sound of rustling sheets drew his attention. Micah's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever, but still somehow bright. "Dad?" His voice was scratchy. "I'm here, mijo." Santiago leaned forward, taking his son's small hand. "How are you feeling?" Micah seemed to consider this carefully. "Tired. Achy." He paused, looking around the familiar hospital room. "Miss Nia used to make me special tea when I felt achy." Santiago's throat tightened. "Did she?" "Mm-hmm." Micah nodded slowly. "It tasted like mint and something else. Made me feel warm inside. Nice warm, not hot like fever warm." His eyes met his father's. "Can Miss Nia come back? She told the best stories while we had tea." The simple request hit Santiago like a physical blow. He squeezed Micah's hand gently. I think I made a mistake about Miss Nia, mijo." "What kind of mistake?" "I thought she was doing something that might hurt you." Santiago admitted quietly. "But I was wrong. I didn't listen when she tried to explain." Micah's face scrunched up in confusion. Miss Nia wouldn't hurt anybody. She said her grandmother taught her how to help people feel better, like how she helped Mrs. Martinez with her back pain. Santiago blinked. "Mrs. Martinez?" "Our neighbor." Micah yawned. "Miss Nia gave her some special cream for her back. She stopped using her cane after that." Each new revelation felt like another weight added to Santiago's conscience. He smoothed Micah's curls back from his forehead, noting with concern that he still felt warm. "Try to get some more sleep, okay?" "Okay," Micah mumbled, already drifting off. "Hope Miss Nia comes back." Santiago waited until Micah's breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep before stepping into the hallway. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a familiar contact. Marcus Chen, a private investigator he'd worked with on various corporate matters over the years. The call connected after 2 rings. "Santiago. Bit late for a business call. This isn't about business, Marcus. I need you to look into something personal." Santiago glanced back through the door at his sleeping son. "There's a woman named Nia Harper. She was accused of medical negligence about 2 years ago, but the case fell apart. I need to know everything. Who accused her, why the witness recanted, what really happened." There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. "Nia Harper. Yeah, I remember that case. Made some local headlines. Give me 48 hours. I'll see what I can dig up. Thank you." Santiago hesitated. "And Marcus? If you can find out where she is now, that would be helpful." "Will do. Take care, Santiago." Back in Micah's room, Santiago settled into his chair again, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's chest. The monitoring equipment beeped softly, marking each heartbeat, while outside the window, the city lights twinkled against the darkening sky. He pulled one of the articles from the folder, studying Nia's photo again. The woman in the image looked tired but determined, standing straight-backed despite the obvious weight of the accusations against her. Santiago thought about how she'd tried to explain the herbs that day in his kitchen, how quickly he'd dismissed her. "If she wasn't poisoning him," he murmured, reaching out to adjust Micah's blanket. What was she trying to do? The question hung in the quiet hospital room, accompanied only by the steady beeping of monitors and his son's peaceful breathing. Santiago leaned back in his chair, the folder open in his lap, preparing for another long night of watching over his son and wrestling with his conscience. Santiago's phone buzzed at 5:15 in the morning, startling him from his light doze in the hospital chair. Marcus Chen's name flashed on the screen, and he quickly stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Sorry for the early hour," Marcus said, his voice tense. "But you need to hear this now. The case against Nia Harper wasn't just flimsy, it was manufactured. The main accuser was Vivian Blackwood." Santiago rubbed his eyes. "The Wellness Empire CEO?" "The same. According to my sources, Blackwood tried to buy out Nia's grandmother's herbal remedies business years ago. When they refused to sell, things got ugly. After her grandmother passed, they went after Nia with everything they had." A chill ran down Santiago's spine. "The malpractice accusations? Completely false. Their star witness admitted to being paid off, but by then Nia had already lost her small clinic and most of her clients." Marcus paused. "Here's the thing, Santiago. Blackwood's people are still looking for her. They've got private investigators on retainer, watching known associates. Your connection to her, it might have put her back on their radar." Santiago's stomach dropped. He'd fired her publicly, in front of neighbors. Word could have spread. "I need to find her first. Be careful, these people play dirty." Marcus promised to send a detailed report and ended the call. Back in Micah's room, Santiago watched the sunrise paint the walls gold. His son's condition remained stable but fragile. The doctors were talking about more aggressive treatments, ones that had failed before. By 7 o'clock, Santiago had arranged for his most trusted employee to sit with Micah. He showered, changed, and began his search at a small herbal shop in the city's oldest district. The elderly shopkeeper studied Nia's photo carefully. "Such a kind soul," she said softly. "Helped my grandson with his asthma last year. Wouldn't take a penny for it." She shook her head sadly. "Haven't seen her in days, though. Such a shame what they did to her." Santiago visited 3 more shops before noon. Each owner recognized Nia, and their stories were remarkably consistent. She had helped their customers, shared her knowledge freely, asked nothing in return. One man described how she'd spent hours teaching young mothers about natural remedies for common childhood ailments. At the community center near her old apartment, a social worker named Grace remembered her well. "Nia volunteered here twice a week," she explained, leading Santiago through the busy hallways. "Taught classes on herbal medicine, helped in our free clinic. The kids adored her. She always had little sachets of calming tea for the anxious ones." "Did she ever mention where she might go if she needed to disappear?" Grace's expression grew guarded. "After what happened with Blackwood's people, Nia learned to be careful. But she has a good heart. Sometimes that means helping people even when it's risky." The afternoon found Santiago at a women's shelter across town. The director, a stern-faced woman named Martha, softened when she saw Nia's photo. "She brought us herbs for our garden," Martha recalled. "Taught our residents how to grow their own medicine. Said her grandmother always told her that healing should be accessible to everyone." She studied Santiago's face. "You're not working for Blackwood, are you?" "No," Santiago said firmly. "I'm trying to protect Nia from them, and I need her help. My son is sick." Martha's expression warmed slightly. "I haven't seen her, but if I do, I'll tell her you're looking. Your name?" "Santiago Drayton." Recognition flickered in Martha's eyes. "The CEO who fired her last week?" Santiago winced. "I made a terrible mistake. I need to make it right." The sun was setting when Santiago arrived at his last stop, a small holistic clinic on the outskirts of town. The closed sign hung in the window, but he could see the remains of an herb garden behind the building. Standing there in the growing darkness, exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders. Every person he'd spoken to had painted the same picture. Nia was gifted, compassionate, and devoted to helping others. And he had thrown her out of his house without a second thought, potentially exposing her to the very people who had tried to destroy her. His phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Micah was asking for him. Santiago took one last look at the clinic before heading to his car. The drive home was quiet, his mind racing with everything he'd learned. In Micah's bedroom, Santiago sat on the edge of the bed, watching his son sleep. The medical equipment they'd installed at home beeped steadily, monitoring his condition. Micah's face was peaceful now, but Santiago knew how quickly that could change. "I'll find her," he whispered, carefully adjusting Micah's blanket. "I promise I'll find her before it's too late." He didn't specify whether he meant too late for Micah's health, or too late to protect Nia from Blackwood's reach. Perhaps both. The night settled around them, and Santiago remained by his son's bed, holding on to hope that somewhere in the city, Nia was safe, and that he would find her before her enemies did. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk as Santiago parked his car outside the Hope Community Clinic. The single-story building looked worn but well-maintained, with cheerful window boxes full of medicinal herbs and hand-painted signs advertising free health services in multiple languages. Santiago checked his phone again, rereading the text from Nurse Delilah. "Try the free clinic on Cedar Street. She sometimes volunteers there." His heart beat faster as he walked through the glass doors into a busy waiting room. The space buzzed with life, mothers cradling infants, elderly patients leafing through old magazines, children playing quietly in a corner with well-loved toys. The walls were decorated with health education posters and artwork clearly made by young patients. Despite the worn furniture and basic amenities, the clinic radiated warmth and care. At the front desk, a nurse in purple scrubs looked up from her computer. Her name tag read, "Angela." "How can I help you?" she asked, her tone professional but kind. Santiago cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Nia Harper. I heard she sometimes volunteers here." Angela's expression turned cautious. "Are you a patient?" "No, I'm—" Santiago hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm Santiago Drayton. My son was her patient briefly, and I need to speak with her about his care." The nurse's eyes widened slightly at his name, but she kept her composure. "Let me check if she's available." She disappeared through a door marked, "Staff Only." Santiago waited, watching a young mother soothe her crying baby with gentle whispers. The scene reminded him painfully of Micah's worst nights, when nothing seemed to ease his suffering. The morning's hospital report showed his fever climbing again. After several minutes, Angela returned with another nurse, older, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Mr. Drayton, I'm Nurse Maria. Please come with me." She led him through narrow hallways lined with examination rooms. "Nia told us what happened," Maria said quietly. "She was very upset. I made a terrible mistake," Santiago admitted. "That's why I'm here." Maria studied him for a moment, then nodded. "She's in our herb room. Just be gentle. She's been through enough." The nurse opened a door to reveal a small, sunny room filled with shelves of dried herbs and roots. The air smelled of chamomile and mint. Nia stood at a wooden table, carefully measuring dried leaves into small cloth bags. She wore simple jeans and a green sweater, her hair tied back in a neat braid. When she heard the door open, Nia looked up. Her hand stilled when she saw Santiago, and her expression became carefully blank. "Mr. Drayton, I'll be right outside if you need me," Maria said pointedly, closing the door. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Nia's hands trembled slightly as she set down the herbs she'd been holding. "How did you find me?" she asked quietly. "I've been looking everywhere," Santiago said. "Nurse Delilah suggested you might be here. Nia, If you're here to threaten legal action, she interrupted, please just say so. I haven't practiced since that night, and I won't. No. Santiago stepped forward, then stopped when she tensed. No, I came to apologize. I was completely wrong about you. And now Micah... His voice cracked. He's gotten so much worse. Nia's professional distance wavered. Worse? How? His fever's back. The joint pain, too, worse than before. The doctors are talking about experimental treatments, but nothing they've tried is working. Santiago ran a hand through his hair. He keeps asking for you. Nia turned away, organizing her herbs with shaking hands. I can't help you, Mr. Drayton. I'm sorry about Micah, truly. But being reported again would destroy what's left of my life. I know about the Blackwood scandal, Santiago said softly. My investigator found the truth. How they framed you when you wouldn't sell them your grandmother's remedies. I know you're innocent. She froze. Then you know why I had to run. One more accusation, one more wealthy person claiming I hurt their child. She shook her head. I can't risk it. Please. Santiago stepped closer, his voice rough with emotion. I was wrong to judge you without understanding. Wrong to let my fear override my judgment. But Micah was doing so well with your care. And now... He swallowed hard. I'm begging you, help my son. Nia finally turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you have any idea what it's like? To have a gift for healing, to see people suffering and know you can help them, but to live in constant fear that helping them will cost you everything? No, Santiago admitted. I don't, but I'm starting to understand what it's like to watch your child suffer and know you pushed away the one person who could help him. The silence stretched between them again, but something in it had shifted. Nia looked down at the dried herbs in her hands, chamomile for calm, mint for clarity, rose hips for healing. If I agree, she said slowly, there would have to be conditions. Anything. Santiago said immediately. You have to trust my methods completely. No more accusations, no more assumptions. I use traditional remedies passed down through generations of healers. They're gentle but powerful, and they work, but only if you let them. Santiago nodded. I understand. I promise to respect your expertise. And, Nia continued, you need to understand that healing takes time. There are no quick fixes, even with herbs. Micah's body needs to find its balance again. Whatever it takes. Santiago agreed. Please, just help him. Nia studied his face for a long moment, seeing the desperation, the regret, and most importantly, the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she began gathering her supplies into a canvas bag. I'll need to examine him first, see how his condition has changed, she said, and we'll need to start slowly, rebuilding what was lost when the treatment was interrupted. Relief flooded through Santiago. Thank you. Thank you so much. Nia shouldered her bag and walked to the door. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Drayton. We have a long way to go. They walked through the clinic together, Nia stopping briefly to speak with Nurse Maria. The older woman hugged her tightly and whispered something in her ear that made Nia smile sadly. As they stepped out into the pale afternoon sunlight, Santiago noticed how Nia scanned the street carefully before walking to his car. The gesture reminded him that while he had found redemption, she was still living with the weight of past betrayals. The space between them crackled with tension and that fragile thread of hope as they walked together toward an uncertain future. The front door of the Drayton home creaked open, and Nia hesitated for just a moment on the threshold. The house felt different now, the earlier warmth of belonging replaced by an uncertain tension. But as she stepped into the living room, a small voice called out, Miss Nia. Micah's pale face lit up from where he lay curled on the couch, wrapped in his favorite blue blanket. His genuine joy at seeing her made her heart squeeze, instantly dissolving her hesitation. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly, setting her canvas bag down. "I heard you weren't feeling well." Santiago hovered nearby, his usual confident stance replaced by something more uncertain. "He's been asking for you," he said quietly. Nia knelt beside the couch, gently placing her hand on Micah's forehead. The fever still burned, though not as intensely as she'd feared. "Tell me how you're feeling, honey." "Everything hurts," Micah whispered, "especially my knees and elbows. And I'm so tired." She nodded, already mentally cataloguing his symptoms. "Mr. Drayton, could you show me his current medications and tell me about his diet these past few days?" Santiago quickly retrieved a small basket of prescription bottles from the kitchen counter. As he listed off Micah's recent meals, mostly soup and toast, nothing too heavy, Nia examined each medication carefully, making notes in a small journal. "See these two?" She pointed to specific bottles. "They're working against each other. One's increasing inflammation response while trying to boost his immune system, while the other's suppressing it." She looked up at Santiago. "This is part of why he's feeling worse." Santiago frowned. "But the doctors prescribed them both." "Different doctors, different departments," Nia explained patiently. "This happens sometimes when treating complex conditions. It's why we need to look at his whole system, not just individual symptoms." She moved through the house methodically, checking Micah's bedroom, bathroom, and the kitchen. Santiago followed, watching as she tested the air quality, examined cleaning products, and asked about recent changes to routine. "Everything in his environment affects his condition," she explained, writing more notes. "Stress levels, sleep patterns, even the detergent you use on his sheets. It's all connected." In the kitchen, she began unpacking her bag, laying out various dried herbs and clean glass jars. "Watch carefully," she told Santiago. "I'll show you how to prepare this blend." She measured carefully, explaining each ingredient. Turmeric root for inflammation, chamomile to help him sleep, lemon balm to ease anxiety. These work together, supporting his body's natural healing process. Santiago leaned closer, genuinely interested. "How do you know which combinations to use?" "Years of study with my grandmother," Nia replied, measuring dried mint leaves. "But also careful observation. Every person responds differently. We have to listen to what Micah's body is telling us." She worked steadily, creating a gentle tea blend specifically for Micah's symptoms. The kitchen filled with soft, soothing aromas as she steeped the mixture. Santiago watched in fascination as she tested the temperature before bringing it to Micah. "Small sips," she instructed, helping him hold the cup. "How does that taste?" "Like flowers and mint," Micah said, managing a small smile. "It's nice." They watched as he finished the tea, his tense shoulders gradually relaxing. Within half an hour, his fever had dropped slightly, and the pain in his joints had eased enough for him to fall into a peaceful sleep. Santiago stared at his son's face, noting the reduction in stress lines around his eyes. "That's remarkable," he said softly. "It's just the beginning," Nia replied, packing her supplies. "The herbs will help with symptoms, but we need to address the underlying imbalances. It takes time and consistency." At the front door, Santiago shifted awkwardly. "Thank you," he said, "for coming back, for helping him. I know you didn't have to." Nia paused, her hand on the doorknob. "You're right, I didn't. I'm here because Micah deserves stability and proper care. He's a special child, Mr. Drayton. He needs someone in his corner who understands what he's going through. The words carried a gentle rebuke that Santiago accepted with a nod. Will you come back tomorrow? Yes, she said. We'll start building a proper treatment plan. But remember your promise. You have to trust the process. I will, he assured her. I've learned my lesson. She gave him a small, measured smile and walked to her car. Santiago stood in the doorway, watching until her taillights disappeared around the corner. The evening air felt cooler now, cleaner somehow. Inside, he could hear Micah's steady breathing, more peaceful than it had been in days. Standing there, Santiago realized how much he still didn't know about Nia Harper, about her knowledge, her past, the depth of her commitment to healing. But for the first time since this ordeal began, he felt genuinely grateful. Not just for her help with Micah, but for the chance to right his wrong and perhaps build something new from the ashes of his mistake. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Nia arranged fresh herbs on the counter. It had become a familiar sight over the past week, her methodical preparation of Micah's daily treatments. Santiago sat at the breakfast table, laptop open but largely ignored, watching as she worked with practiced ease. The chamomile and mint need to steep for exactly 7 minutes, she explained, measuring the dried leaves carefully. Any longer, and it becomes too bitter for Micah. Santiago nodded, making mental notes. He'd scaled back his work hours significantly, delegating more to his team so he could be present for these morning sessions. The board members hadn't been happy, but watching his son's steady improvement made it worth every concerned email and rescheduled meeting. Miss Nia. Micah padded into the kitchen in his favorite dinosaur pajamas, looking more energetic than he had in weeks. Can we do the breathing game again? Nia's face softened as she turned to him. Of course, sweetheart. Right after breakfast. Remember what we talked about? Good food first, then exercises. Santiago watched as his son climbed onto a kitchen chair without wincing, a small victory that would have seemed impossible just days ago. The new meal plan Nia had introduced was working wonders. Fresh fruits, whole grains, and carefully seasoned proteins that Micah actually enjoyed eating. Daddy, watch! Micah demonstrated the breathing exercise Nia had taught him, placing his small hands on his belly. You breathe in like you're smelling flowers, and out like you're blowing bubbles. That's perfect, buddy, Santiago praised, catching Nia's approving smile. After breakfast, they moved to the living room for what Nia called healing time. It wasn't just about physical exercises. She had a gentle way of getting Micah to talk about his feelings, especially about his mother. I miss how Mummy used to sing when she cooked, Micah said quietly, sitting cross-legged on the carpet. Sometimes I try to remember the songs, but they're getting fuzzy in my head. Santiago felt his throat tighten, but Nia handled the moment with grace. That's a beautiful memory, Micah. Would you like to draw a picture of your mum singing? Sometimes putting memories on paper helps keep them clear. She produced colored pencils and paper from her bag, and soon Micah was absorbed in his artwork, occasionally humming fragments of half-remembered lullabies. Santiago had to step into his office briefly, overwhelmed by the tender way Nia addressed his son's grief, something he'd struggled to do himself. The days fell into a soothing rhythm. Mornings began with herbal teas and gentle exercises. Afternoons often found them in the garden Nia had suggested they start, teaching Micah about the healing properties of different plants. The house, which had felt hollow for so long, began to fill with new scents and sounds, mint and lavender, Micah's more frequent laughter, the soft murmur of Nia's voice explaining natural remedies. One evening, as Nia packed her supplies after a particularly good day where Micah had shown no signs of pain, Santiago found himself reluctant to see her leave. Would you like some tea? he offered. Real tea, I mean, not the medicinal kind. She hesitated briefly, then nodded. That would be nice, thank you. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from their cups in the quiet house. Micah was already asleep, his rest deeper and more peaceful these days. I've been wanting to ask. Santiago began carefully. How did you learn all this? The herbs, the healing methods, it's remarkable. Nia wrapped her hands around her cup, her expression softening with memory. My grandmother raised me, she said. She was known in our community as a gifted healer. People would come from miles around seeking her help. She taught you everything. From the time I could walk, she'd take me into the woods, teaching me to identify plants, explaining their properties. Nia smiled. She always said healing wasn't just about treating symptoms. It was about understanding the whole person, body and spirit. Santiago nodded, thinking about how she approached Micah's care. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Nia's voice held both pride and sadness. She passed away 5 years ago, but everything I do honors her teachings. She believed in using knowledge to help others, no matter the cost. They talked until their teacups were empty, Nia sharing stories about learning traditional remedies at her grandmother's knee, Santiago finding himself drawn into the rich history of healing she described. When she finally gathered her things to leave, the evening had grown late. At the front door, Santiago watched as she pulled on her light jacket. The house felt different now, warmer, more alive. It wasn't just the herbs or the new routines, it was Nia herself. She brought a presence that seemed to fill the empty spaces, making the rooms feel like a home again, rather than just a place they lived. Thank you, he said softly, for everything you're doing for Micah, for us. She gave him a gentle smile. Get some rest, Mr. Drayton. I'll see you tomorrow. After she left, Santiago stood at the door longer than usual, aware of the lingering warmth her presence had created. The house had been so cold for so long after losing his wife, but now there was something new growing here, something healing and hopeful. He walked through the quiet rooms, checking on Micah one last time. His son slept peacefully, clutching the stuffed bear Nia had given him to hug during their breathing exercises. The sight made Santiago's heart full in a way he hadn't experienced in years. This was more than just medical improvement. It was as if Nia had somehow known exactly what both father and son needed to begin truly healing. Her gentle presence had become as essential as any medicine, bringing light back into their darkened world one day at a time. The gentle autumn sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Micah sat at the table, his pencil moving carefully across his math workbook. A week had passed since his last severe flare-up, and the improvement in his condition was remarkable. Nia sat beside him, offering quiet encouragement as he worked through simple addition problems. Santiago watched from the doorway, struck by how natural this scene felt. His son's cheeks had regained their healthy color, and the dark circles under his eyes had faded. Even more striking was the absence of pain in his movements, no wincing when he shifted position, no careful way of holding his joints. That's perfect, Micah, Nia praised, pointing to a completed equation. You're getting faster at these. Micah beamed at the compliment. Can we do science next? I like learning about plants. Let's finish these last 2 problems first, she said with a gentle smile. Then we can talk about photosynthesis. Santiago stepped into the kitchen, pouring himself a cup of coffee. These moments had become precious to him. Watching his son engage with learning again, seeing him excited about something other than managing his pain. He cleared his throat. Nia, could we talk after Micah's lesson? There are some things I'd like to discuss. She nodded, though Santiago noticed a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. Later, after Micah had moved to the living room for his rest period, Santiago and Nia sat at the kitchen table. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the wooden surface, and the house was quiet except for the distant sound of Micah's nature documentary playing softly. "I've been wanting to ask you," Santiago began carefully, "about what happened before. The accusations, the scandal. I've seen the headlines, but I'd like to hear your side." Nia's hands tightened around her teacup. "It's not a pleasant story," she said softly, "and it's not entirely in the past." "I need to understand," Santiago pressed gently, "especially now that you're helping Micah." She took a deep breath, and Santiago could see her gathering courage. "There's a woman named Victoria Blackwood," she began. "She owns Vital Essence Wellness Empire. 3 years ago she approached me about collaborating on a line of natural remedies. I was young, excited about the opportunity to help more people." Nia's voice grew quieter. "I shared my grandmother's formulations, recipes that had been in my family for generations." Santiago leaned forward, listening intently as Nia continued. 6 months into our partnership, Victoria started changing the formulations without telling me, cutting corners, using cheaper ingredients. When I confronted her, she locked me out of the company. Nia's eyes grew distant with memory. Then one of her clients died, someone who was using a modified version of my grandmother's heart tonic. Victoria blamed me, claimed I had given her dangerous formulas deliberately. "But that wasn't true," Santiago stated, his voice hard with certainty. "Of course not, but she had powerful lawyers, connections in the media. I was suddenly painted as a dangerous fraud." Nia's hands trembled slightly. "Everything I'd built was destroyed. My reputation, my practice, gone." Santiago felt anger rising in his chest. "We should fight this. With the right legal team—" "No." Nia cut him off firmly. "Mr. Drayton, Santiago, you don't understand. Victoria Blackwood doesn't just have money and lawyers, she has influence. Anyone who's tried to expose her has been systematically ruined. That's why I keep moving, why I work in free clinics and take private clients carefully." "But what she did to you was wrong," Santiago insisted. Nia's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of resignation and determination. "Of course it was wrong. But confronting people with powerful lawyers is dangerous, not just for me, for anyone who helps me." She glanced toward the living room where Micah was. "I won't risk bringing that kind of trouble to your door." Santiago sat back, frustrated by the injustice, but understanding her fear. After Nia left that evening, he couldn't shake the conversation from his mind. In his home office, he began researching Victoria Blackwood and Vital Essence Wellness Empire. Hours passed as he dug deeper, his business experience helping him spot patterns in the company's history. There were other accusations of stolen formulations, quickly buried under settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Financial records showed sudden changes in ingredient suppliers around the time Nia mentioned, shifting to cheaper alternatives. Most telling were the inconsistencies in the legal documentation surrounding the client's death, medical reports that seemed incomplete, investigations that were closed suspiciously quickly. The more Santiago read, the clearer it became. Nia hadn't just been blamed. She had been deliberately framed to protect Victoria Blackwood's empire and reputation. Close to midnight, Santiago walked quietly to Micah's room to check on him. His son lay peacefully asleep, his breathing deep and even. There was no sign of the joint pain that had once made him whimper even in his sleep. The stuffed bear Nia had given him was tucked under one arm, and his face was relaxed in true rest. Standing in the doorway, Santiago felt the weight of his earlier judgment of Nia press heavily on his heart. This woman, who had lost everything because of someone else's greed, was still dedicating her life to helping others. She had healed his son when modern medicine couldn't, and he had nearly destroyed what little security she had left. She saved him. Santiago whispered into the darkness, his voice thick with emotion. And I nearly ruined her life. The night seemed to hold his words, making them echo in his conscience. In the quiet house, Santiago realized that helping Nia reclaim her reputation wasn't just about justice. It was about protecting the gift she offered to people like Micah, people who needed healing that went beyond conventional medicine. The autumn sun was setting early, casting long shadows through the kitchen windows as Santiago watched Nia gathering her things to leave. All week, he'd noticed how Micah's eyes followed her movements, how his son seemed to bloom in her presence. Making a sudden decision, he cleared his throat. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" The words came out quickly, almost surprising himself. "I mean, as a thank you, for everything you've done for Micah." Nia paused, her hand hovering over her bag. "Oh, I wouldn't want to impose—" "Please, Miss Nia." Micah's voice piped up from the doorway, his eyes bright with hope. "Daddy makes really good spaghetti." Santiago smiled at his son's enthusiasm. "It's nothing fancy, but there's plenty, and I know Micah would love it." Nia looked between them, her hesitation softening. "Well, when you put it that way." She set her bag back down. "I'd love to." The kitchen came alive with movement and chatter as Santiago prepared dinner. Micah sat at the counter, telling Nia about his favorite dinosaurs while she helped chop vegetables for the salad. The simple domesticity of the moment struck Santiago. How natural it felt to have her there, how Micah's laughter seemed to fill every corner of the room. "Can I tell Miss Nia about the time we made the pasta explosion?" Micah asked, grinning. Santiago groaned good-naturedly. "Do we have to share all my kitchen disasters?" "Oh, now I have to hear this," Nia said, her eyes twinkling. As Santiago stirred the sauce, Micah launched into the story of how his father had once accidentally turned on the mixer too high with dry pasta in the bowl, sending uncooked spaghetti flying everywhere. Nia's laughter joined Micah's, and Santiago found himself chuckling too, remembering how they'd found pieces of pasta in unexpected places for weeks afterward. The meal itself was simple, spaghetti with meat sauce, garlic bread, and a fresh salad. But the conversation flowed easily. Micah chatted about school, his face animated as he described his art projects and science experiments. Santiago noticed how Nia asked just the right questions, drawing out more details and making his son feel heard. "This sauce is wonderful," Nia commented, breaking off a piece of garlic bread. "Is it your own recipe?" Santiago shook his head. "My mother's, actually. One of the few things I can cook without disaster." "Daddy's learning, though," Micah added loyally. "He only burns things sometimes now." Their laughter filled the dining room again, and Santiago caught himself studying Nia's face in these unguarded moments, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, how her whole expression softened when she looked at Micah. After dinner, Micah bounced in his chair. "Can we play Candyland, please?" Santiago glanced at Nia. "Only if Miss Nia would like to join us." "I haven't played Candyland in years," she said, but her smile was warm. "I'd love to." They gathered in the living room, sitting cross-legged around the coffee table. The familiar bright colors of the game board brought back memories for Santiago, of playing with Micah's mother, of early days when their family was whole. But watching Micah now, squealing with delight as he moved his piece through the peppermint forest, Santiago felt a different kind of wholeness settling over the room. Nia proved to be a dramatic player, gasping in mock dismay when she drew bad cards and celebrating Micah's victories with enthusiastic high fives. Her playfulness drew out Santiago's competitive side, and soon they were all fully invested in the race through Candyland. No fair. Micah giggled as Nia's piece advanced quickly. You're using your magic powers. I would never. Nia pressed a hand to her heart in exaggerated innocence. Although... She wiggled her fingers mysteriously over the cards, making Micah dissolve into giggles again. The game stretched into 2 rounds, but eventually Santiago noticed Micah's eyes growing heavy. Time for bed, buddy. Just 5 more minutes? Micah pleaded, but a yawn gave him away. I should be going anyway, Nia said softly, starting to stand. Will you come say goodnight, Miss Nia? Micah asked, his voice small and hopeful. She followed them upstairs, standing in the doorway as Santiago helped Micah into his pajamas and tucked him under the covers. The boys' room was a cozy space, walls decorated with dinosaur posters and shelves lined with books and toys. Miss Nia? Micah's sleepy voice came as Santiago adjusted his blanket. Yes, sweetheart. Can you stay forever? The innocent question hung in the air, making both adults catch their breath. Nia moved closer to the bed, kneeling beside it. I'll be back tomorrow, she said gently. That's a promise. Santiago's chest tightened at the tender way she smoothed Micah's hair back, at how his son leaned into her touch. When they quietly closed his bedroom door, the moment felt weighted with unspoken things. They walked downstairs in comfortable silence, and Santiago followed Nia to the front door. The evening had grown cool, and leaves skittered across the porch in the autumn breeze. Thank you for staying, Santiago said, his voice low to avoid carrying upstairs. It meant a lot to Micah, to both of us. Nia adjusted her scarf, and Santiago noticed how the porch light caught the gold flecks in her eyes. I had a wonderful time. It's been a long while since I've had a family dinner. The word family settled between them, making the air feel charged with possibility. For a moment they both stood there, as if neither wanted to break the spell of the evening. Finally, Nia stepped onto the porch. Good night, Santiago. Drive safely, he replied, watching as she walked to her car. The night was clear and still as Santiago stood in the doorway, following Nia's taillights with his eyes. A black SUV parked across the street suddenly flashed its headlights and pulled away from the curb, following the same direction as Nia's car. The vehicles disappeared around the corner, leaving Santiago alone in the doorway, unaware that the warm, peaceful evening had just taken a darker turn. Santiago glanced at his watch again. 7:45 in the morning. Nia always arrived at 7:30 sharp, her punctuality as reliable as sunrise. He paced the kitchen, phone in hand, trying to squash down the growing unease in his stomach. Maybe traffic is bad, Micah suggested from his perch at the breakfast counter, pushing cereal around in his bowl. His small face was pinched with worry, though he tried to sound hopeful. Maybe, Santiago agreed, but his thumb was already pressing the call button again. For the 4th time that morning, Nia's cheerful voicemail message played in his ear. Hi, you've reached Nia Harper. Please leave a message, and I'll call back as soon as I can. Santiago ended the call without leaving another message. Through the kitchen window, he watched cars crawl past on their morning commute, none of them Nia's familiar blue sedan. The morning sun felt too bright, almost harsh, highlighting the empty driveway where her car should be parked. Daddy. Micah's voice was smaller now. I don't feel good. Santiago turned to find his son's face pale, though he couldn't tell if it was from worry or his condition. He crossed the kitchen in 3 quick strides, pressing his hand to Micah's forehead. No fever, but the boy's shoulders were tense with anxiety. I need to check on Miss Nia, Santiago said, making a quick decision. Would you be okay staying with Mrs. Peterson next door for a little while? Micah nodded, though his fingers twisted in the hem of his pajama shirt. Is Miss Nia okay? I'm sure she is, Santiago said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I just want to make sure. 20 minutes later, after settling Micah with their elderly neighbor and her comfort-seeking cat, Santiago drove through morning traffic toward Nia's apartment. His mind kept replaying the image of that black SUV from the night before, how it had pulled away so smoothly, so purposefully. He should have noticed something was wrong. Should have warned her. Nia's apartment building looked peaceful enough in the morning light, its brick facade warm and welcoming. But as Santiago approached her third-floor unit, his steps slowed. Her door stood slightly ajar, a silent warning that made his heart rate spike. "Nia?" he called out, pushing the door open wider. No answer. The apartment told a story he didn't want to read. Cabinet doors hung open in the kitchen, herbal jars knocked sideways on the counter. A chair lay tipped on its side near the small dining table. On the floor, a scattered trail of papers led toward the bedroom, as if someone had grabbed files in haste. Santiago moved through the space carefully, noting signs of a rushed departure. Or worse. The bedroom closet gaped open, hangers empty and askew. A drawer hung half open, clothing spilling out. On the bedside table, Nia's phone lay face down, its screen cracked. With trembling fingers, Santiago picked up the phone. 15 missed calls showed on the display, his own number plus several others he didn't recognize. The last incoming call had been at 11:23 the previous night, just after she'd left his house. He pulled out his own phone and dialed his private investigator, Marcus. The man answered on the first ring. "I need everything you can find on that SUV from last night," Santiago said without preamble. "And I need it fast." "Already on it," Marcus replied, his voice grim. "That vehicle is registered to Elite Guardian Services, private security firm contracted exclusively by Wellness Empire, Inc. Santiago's free hand clenched into a fist. Wellness Empire, the very company owned by the mogul who had framed Nia. They followed her home. Looks like it. And Santiago, they've been watching your house too. My team spotted another one of their vehicles this morning, 2 blocks over. The knowledge sat like ice in Santiago's stomach. He thanked Marcus and ended the call, already moving towards the door. He needed to get back to Micah. The drive home felt endless, though traffic had cleared somewhat. Santiago's mind raced through possibilities, each one darker than the last. He should have protected her better, should have realized the danger wasn't past just because she'd started helping them again. Mrs. Peterson met him at her door, concern evident in her kind face. "Micah's been very quiet," she said softly. "He keeps asking about his friend." Inside, Santiago found Micah curled up on the floral couch, the orange tabby cat purring against his side. His son looked up with eyes too old for his young face. "Something's wrong with Miss Nia, isn't it?" Santiago sat beside him, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Nia might need our help," he explained, wrapping an arm around Micah's thin shoulders. "Some people who weren't very nice to her in the past might be bothering her again." "Like bullies?" Micah's voice wavered. "Something like that, yes. But I'm going to do everything I can to help her, okay?" Micah nodded against his father's shirt. "She helped make me better. We have to help her too." Back at home, Santiago made several calls, to his lawyer, to Marcus again, to contacts who might have seen or heard something useful. He was in the middle of organizing a broader search when his phone rang, an unknown local number flashing on the screen. "Mr. Drayton?" A clipped official voice spoke when he answered. "This is Officer Chen with the local police department. We're calling to inform you that we have Anaya Harper in custody." Santiago's blood ran cold. "On what charges?" "Outstanding warrants from another jurisdiction. She was picked up early this morning. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. False warrants, no doubt, created by the same people who had framed her before. They had used the legal system itself as their trap. "Which precinct?" Santiago demanded, but his question was met with a short series of beeps. The call had ended, leaving him standing in his kitchen, gripping his phone so hard his knuckles turned white. Through the doorway he could see Micah sitting in the living room, carefully arranging his colored pencils, a habit he'd picked up from Nia, who taught him that organization could be calming. The sight of those neat rows of colors, lined up with such innocent hope, made Santiago's chest ache. They had taken Nia, just as she'd feared they would. And now she sat in a cell somewhere, caught in the very nightmare she'd tried so hard to escape. Santiago grabbed his keys and jacket, his mind already mapping the fastest route to the police station. Traffic crawled through downtown at the worst possible time, the late afternoon rush hour turning the streets into a maze of brake lights and honking horns. He drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, checking his watch every few minutes as precious time slipped away. The police station loomed ahead, a stark brick building with metal detectors at the entrance. Inside, fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across worn linoleum floors. Santiago approached the front desk, where a tired-looking officer sat behind bulletproof glass. "I need to see Nia Harper," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "She was brought in this morning." The officer typed something into his computer, frowning slightly. "Harper, yes. She's not available for visitors at this time." "I'm Santiago Drayton." He pulled out his business card. "My lawyers will be here shortly. I have reason to believe she's being held under false pretenses." "Sir, Ms. Harper is being processed for transfer," the officer replied, barely glancing at the card. "There's nothing I can do." "Transfer? To where?" "That information is restricted pending investigation." Santiago's phone buzzed. A text from his head lawyer, Catherine Martinez. "Just reviewed arrest docs. Wellness Empire's legal team filed emergency petition citing flight risk. Judge Malcolm signed warrant yesterday." His jaw clenched. Judge Malcolm, known for his connections to corporate interests. Of course they'd gone to him. "I need to speak with your supervisor," Santiago insisted to the officer. A different officer appeared, this one wearing sergeant's stripes. "Mr. Drayton, I understand your concern, but Ms. Harper is being lawfully held on valid warrants. Unless you're her legal representation, we cannot discuss the case." "These warrants were manufactured by people trying to silence her," Santiago argued, his voice rising. "She's innocent." "That's for the courts to decide, sir." The sergeant's tone grew firmer. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave now." Santiago's phone buzzed again. Mrs. Peterson's number. His heart dropped as he read the message. "Micah asking for you. Very upset and running a fever." Torn between staying to fight for Nia and rushing home to his son, Santiago felt the weight of impossible choices. But Micah had to come first. Always first. The drive home seemed to take forever, worry gnawing at his insides. He found Mrs. Peterson in Micah's room, the boy curled up in bed, his cheeks flushed with fever. "Daddy?" Micah's voice came out small and scratchy. "Did you find Miss Nia?" Santiago sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing back his son's damp hair. "Not yet, buddy, but I'm working on it." "My joints hurt again," Micah whispered. "Like before." Santiago's heart clenched. The stress of losing Nia had triggered exactly what they'd feared, another flare-up. He helped Micah take his medication and got him settled with extra pillows, trying to remember everything Nia had taught them about managing pain. "Try the breathing exercise Miss Nia showed you," he suggested gently. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." Micah nodded, his small face scrunching in concentration as he followed the familiar pattern. Santiago watched him, anger burning in his chest at the people who had torn Nia away from them. Once Micah finally drifted off to sleep, Santiago retreated to his home office. His laptop glowed in the darkness as he began typing. For immediate release, Santiago Drayton, CEO of Drayton Technologies, announces full investigation into fraudulent claims against renowned herbalist Nia Harper. He worked through the night, gathering financial records that showed suspicious patterns in Wellness Empire's dealings, collecting testimonials from people Nia had helped, and documenting the timeline of her persecution. His legal team sent over case files showing irregularities in the original accusations against her. As dawn approached, Santiago paused to check on Micah again. His son slept fitfully, occasional whimpers escaping his lips. Standing in the doorway, Santiago made a silent promise. To Micah, to Nia, to himself. He would not let fear silence the truth again. He would not stand by while corrupt power crushed goodness. He would fight with everything he had to bring Nia home. Back at his desk, Santiago began drafting emails to journalists he trusted, laying out the evidence of the conspiracy against Nia. His fingers moved steadily over the keyboard, determination replacing exhaustion. They had tried to bury her story once before. This time, he would make sure the whole world heard it. The sky outside his window began to lighten, marking another sleepless night. But Santiago kept working, driven by the memory of Nia's gentle strength and Micah's trust. In both of them, he had failed her once through fear and misunderstanding. He would not fail her again. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Santiago strode into his corporate headquarters, determination written across his tired features. He hadn't slept, but adrenaline kept him sharp and focused. His executive assistant looked startled to see him so early, especially on a Saturday. "Call the board emergency meeting for 9 o'clock, he instructed, heading straight to his office. "And get me Catherine Martinez on the line immediately." Within minutes, his head lawyer's voice filled the room through the speakerphone. "Santiago, I've been reviewing those documents all night. The irregularities in Wellness Empire's case against Nia. They're not just suspicious, they're criminal." "Show me everything," Santiago said, pulling up the files on his computer. Catherine's team had uncovered a pattern of doctored medical records, backdated complaints, and suspicious financial transactions. The mogul Diana Wells had systematically built a case against Nia using fabricated evidence. "Look at the timestamps on these documents," Catherine pointed out. "They claim Nia was treating patients at times when security footage shows she wasn't even in the building. And the signatures? 3 different handwriting experts confirm they're forged." Santiago leaned forward, studying the evidence. "What about the patient who supposedly died under her care?" "That's where it gets interesting," Catherine replied. "We found the original medical records. The patient never received any treatment from Nia. They were under Wells' care exclusively. The morning evolved into a whirlwind of activity. Santiago's board members arrived, many still adjusting their ties and looking confused about the emergency weekend meeting. He laid out the situation clearly. Their company would be taking a public stand against corporate corruption and fighting for justice. "This isn't just about one healer," he explained, pacing before the boardroom windows. "It's about powerful people thinking they can destroy lives without consequences. We have the resources to fight back. I'm asking for your support." One by one, the board members nodded. Santiago's reputation for integrity, combined with the overwhelming evidence, made the decision clear. By 10 o'clock, Santiago's PR team had set up a command center in the conference room. They began reaching out to former patients from Nia's community clinic days, and the response was overwhelming. People came forward eagerly, sharing stories of how her natural remedies had helped them when traditional medicine had failed. "She saved my daughter's life," one mother testified, her voice breaking as she spoke to the PR team. The doctors said nothing could be done for her chronic pain. Miss Nia's treatments gave her back her childhood. Similar stories poured in throughout the morning. A construction worker described how Nia's herbal treatments helped him recover from a devastating workplace injury. An elderly man spoke about how she'd visited him daily after his wife died, bringing healing teas and companionship. Around noon, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Margaret Wilson, a retired nurse in her 50s who had worked at Wellness Empire, arrived at Santiago's office. Her hands shook as she placed a thick folder on his desk. "I've been keeping these," she said quietly. "I knew what they did to that poor girl wasn't right." The folder contained original patient charts and internal memos, concrete evidence of how Diana Wells had manipulated records to frame Nia. Margaret had methodically documented everything, waiting for the right moment to come forward. "They threatened my pension if I spoke up," she explained, her voice stronger now. "But I can't stay silent anymore. That young woman helped so many people. What they did to her was evil." Santiago's legal team worked quickly to verify Margaret's documents. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they had enough evidence to go public. Santiago's PR team crafted a powerful press release detailing the systematic harassment and false accusations against Nia. The story exploded across social media. Justice for Nia started trending as more people shared their experiences with her healing work. News outlets picked up the story, focusing on the David versus Goliath aspect of a small-time healer being framed by a corporate giant. At 3:30, Santiago received word that reporters had begun gathering outside Wellness Empire's headquarters, demanding comments about the allegations. Diana Wells' carefully crafted public image began crumbling as more evidence emerged. The prosecutor's office was flooded with calls and emails. By 4 o'clock, they announced they would review the case immediately. Santiago's legal team presented their evidence, including Margaret Wilson's testimony and documentation. The hours crawled by as Santiago waited for news. He kept checking on Micah through video calls with Mrs. Peterson, his heart aching at his son's continued discomfort. "Just hold on, buddy," he whispered after each call. "We're bringing her back." At 6:45 in the evening, Santiago's phone rang. The caller ID showed Catherine Martinez's number. His hand trembled slightly as he answered. "Santiago." Catherine's voice was bright with victory. "The prosecutor just dropped all charges. They're releasing her now." Santiago closed his eyes, relief washing over him like a wave. "You're sure?" 100%. The evidence of fraud was too overwhelming to ignore. "Nia's free, Santiago. You did it." He sat down heavily in his chair, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Thank you, Catherine. Thank you all." After hanging up, Santiago stood at his office window, watching the city lights flicker to life in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, Nia was walking free, her name cleared at last. He thought of Micah, of the peace Nia brought to their home, of the healing that went far beyond just physical symptoms. His phone buzzed with a text from the police station. "Ms. Harper's release paperwork being processed now." Santiago grabbed his coat, already heading for the door. It was time to bring their healer home. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the courthouse steps as Santiago helped Micah out of the car. His son's small hand gripped his tightly, both of them nearly vibrating with anticipation. They had rushed here straight from home, Micah insisting on changing into his favorite blue sweater, the one Nia had once complimented. "Do you think Miss Nia will be happy to see us, Dad?" Micah asked, his voice small but hopeful. Santiago squeezed his son's hand gently. "I'm sure she will be, buddy. Very happy." They climbed the courthouse steps slowly, mindful of Micah's still tender joints. Other people milled about, Lawyers in sharp suits, court officers in crisp uniforms, families waiting for their own moments of justice. But Santiago barely noticed them. His eyes remained fixed on the heavy wooden doors, waiting. Minutes stretched like hours. Micah shifted from foot to foot, occasionally leaning against his father's leg when standing became too tiring. Santiago checked his phone repeatedly, reading and rereading Catherine's last message. Processing final paperwork now. Finally, the doors swung open. Nia emerged into the sunlight, looking somehow both smaller and stronger than Santiago remembered. She wore the same clothes from the day of her arrest, but her shoulders were straight, her head held high. For a moment, she blinked in the bright light, one hand shading her eyes. "Miss Nia." Micah's cry split the air. Before Santiago could react, his son had broken free, running straight toward her, with a burst of energy that seemed to defy his condition. Nia's face transformed at the sound of Micah's voice. She dropped to her knees, arms opening wide just as Micah crashed into her. The boy buried his face in her shoulder, his small body shaking with sobs. "I missed you so much," Micah cried, his words muffled against her shirt. "My joints hurt again when you were gone." Nia held him close, her own eyes glistening. "Oh, sweet boy," she whispered, running a gentle hand over his hair. "I missed you too. So very much." Santiago approached slowly, his throat tight with emotion. He watched as Nia comforted his son with the same tender care she'd always shown, despite everything she'd been through. When she finally looked up at him, he saw no anger in her eyes, only a deep, knowing warmth that made his chest ache. "Nia," he began, his voice rough. "I'm so sorry. For everything." She stood carefully, keeping one arm around Micah, who refused to let go. "Santiago, no, please, let me say this." He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for that first night, when I let fear cloud my judgment. I'm sorry for not trusting you, and I'm especially sorry that my attempts to help ended up putting you in danger." Nia was quiet for a moment, her free hand absently rubbing Micah's back in soothing circles. "You know," she said finally, "I always knew your heart was good. Wounded, yes. Scared, certainly, but good." "You're too kind," Santiago said, shaking his head. "No," she corrected gently. "I'm honest. You fought for me when you didn't have to. You risked your reputation to clear my name. Those aren't the actions of someone I need to forgive." Micah looked up at them both, his face tear-stained, but happy. "Can we go home now? All of us?" Santiago met Nia's eyes. "Please," he said softly. "Come home with us. You need rest and—" He smiled slightly. "I'm going to cook dinner." Both Nia and Micah looked at him with identical expressions of surprise. "You cook?" Micah asked, sounding skeptical. "I used to," Santiago admitted. Before everything. I think it's time I tried again." The drive home was quiet, but comfortable. Micah sat in the back seat, holding Nia's hand through the gap between the seats, as if afraid she might disappear again. Santiago caught glimpses of them in the rearview mirror, his son's tired but content face, Nia's gentle smile as she pointed out interesting clouds or birds to keep him engaged. At home, Santiago insisted that Nia settle on the couch while he headed to the kitchen. He could hear Micah's voice drifting in, telling Nia about everything she'd missed, including how his father had barely slept while searching for her. In the kitchen, Santiago moved slowly but purposefully, reacquainting himself with pots and pans that had gone largely unused. He chose a simple recipe he remembered from his own childhood, his mother's chicken soup with rice, loaded with vegetables and gentle seasonings. As he chopped and stirred, he found himself remembering other times in this kitchen, teaching his late wife to make this same soup, her laughter when she added too much pepper, the way she'd kiss his cheek and say, Next time will be perfect. The soup simmered, filling the house with warm, homey scents. Santiago heard Micah's delighted giggle from the living room and realized how long it had been since that sound had filled their home. He added a final pinch of salt, tasted the broth, and nodded with satisfaction. When he called them to dinner, Nia tried to help set the table, but Santiago shooed her back to her seat. "You've taken care of us enough," he said firmly. "Let us take care of you for once." They settled around the table, steam rising from their bowls in the soft evening light. Micah sat between them, looking happier than he had in weeks. Santiago watched as Nia took her first spoonful, her eyes widening slightly. "This is wonderful," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "Dad never cooks," Micah informed her solemnly. "Like, never ever." "Well," Santiago said, smiling at them both, "maybe that should change." They ate quietly, the only sounds the gentle clink of spoons and Micah's occasional happy sighs. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the kitchen in soft golden light. Peace settled over the house like a tangible thing, warm and sweet as honey, healing as Nia's gentlest remedies. Santiago looked at his son's bright face, at Nia's quiet contentment, and felt something shift and settle in his own heart. Here, in this moment, they were exactly where they needed to be. The weeks following Nia's release blossomed into months filled with healing and quiet joy. Santiago threw himself into creating something meaningful from the darkness they'd endured. Working with his legal team, he established the Harper Healing Center, a community clinic where holistic medicine could be practiced safely and legally. "Are you sure about this?" Nia had asked when he first proposed the idea, her eyes wide with disbelief. Santiago had smiled, watching Micah playing in the garden, stronger than he'd been in years. "I've never been more certain of anything." The transformation of the old brick building on Mason Street into a warm, welcoming clinic became a community effort. Neighbors brought plants for the meditation garden, local artists painted murals of healing herbs on the walls, and elderly residents shared their own traditional remedies with Nia, who carefully documented each one. Micah insisted on helping too, proudly carrying small pots of herbs to the greenhouse they'd built behind the clinic. His health continued to improve under Nia's gentle care, his episodes becoming increasingly rare. The dark circles under his eyes faded, replaced by a rosy glow that made Santiago's heart swell every time he saw it. "Dad," Micah said one afternoon while they were planting lavender, "is Miss Nia going to stay forever now?" Santiago looked across the garden where Nia was teaching a group of young mothers about natural remedies for common childhood ailments. She caught his eye and smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had become as necessary to him as breathing. "I hope so, buddy," he answered softly. "I really hope so." Their relationship grew like the herbs in Nia's garden, slowly, naturally, taking root in fertile soil. There were quiet moments in the kitchen while preparing Micah's remedies, long conversations on the porch after he'd gone to bed, and countless small kindnesses exchanged without words. Santiago found himself looking forward to the gentle brush of her hand when she passed him tea, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the peaceful silence they could share without awkwardness. As summer deepened into early fall, the clinic was ready to open officially. Santiago planned a celebration in his backyard, inviting neighbors who'd helped make the dream a reality. Paper lanterns hung from tree branches, casting warm light over tables laden with food. Children played tag on the lawn while their parents chatted in small groups, many sharing stories of how Nia's healing touch had already helped their families. Micah appointed himself official tour guide, proudly showing everyone his special corner in the garden where he grew his own chamomile. "Miss Nia says it helps people sleep better," he explained to anyone who would listen. "And it makes really good tea." Santiago watched from the patio as Nia moved through the crowd, graciously accepting congratulations but deflecting praise to the community's effort. She wore a simple sundress printed with tiny flowers, her natural curls caught up in a loose bun, and Santiago thought she had never looked more beautiful. As the evening wore on, families began heading home, carrying leftover dishes and sleepy children. Micah, exhausted from playing host, fell asleep on the porch swing, a content smile on his face. Santiago carefully carried him up to bed, tucking him in with a gentle kiss. When he returned to the backyard, he found Nia standing by the herb garden, her face tilted up to the stars. Without speaking, he gestured toward the walking path that wound through the property. She nodded, falling into step beside him. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the small pond at the edge of the yard. Cricket song filled the air, and fireflies danced above the water like earthbound stars. Santiago turned to face Nia, his heart beating a steady rhythm of certainty. "I never thanked you properly," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on us. On Micah. On me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I first met you, I was so lost in my own fear that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You brought healing not just to Micah's body but to our home, our hearts." Nia's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "You gave me something too," she whispered. "A chance to practice my grandmother's teachings openly, to help people without fear. A place to belong." Santiago reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, she met him halfway, her fingers intertwining with his. Her hand was warm and slightly rough from working with herbs, and it fit perfectly in his. "Stay," he said simply. "Not just as Micah's healer, not just as the clinic's director. Stay because this has become your home too, because we're better together than we ever were apart." Nia squeezed his hand gently, and in that gesture was every answer he needed. They stood there by the pond, hands clasped, hearts beating in sync, no longer two separate people walking alone, but something new and wonderful just beginning to bloom. The fireflies continued their dance above the water, nature's own celebration of healing, of trust, of love growing as naturally as herbs in a garden. And in the quiet of the evening, surrounded by the scent of lavender and the song of crickets, Santiago and Nia found their path forward, together. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows on a peaceful Sunday afternoon, casting warm patches across the granite countertops. The gentle clinking of spoons against pots and the soft murmur of voices filled the air as Santiago and Nia worked side by side preparing lunch. Their movements had grown comfortable and synchronized over time, a dance born of shared meals and quiet moments. "Can we have Miss Nia's special soup?" Micah asked from his perch at the kitchen island, his legs swinging beneath him. "Please, the one with all the good herbs?" Santiago's heart squeezed with tender recognition. It was the same soup that had once filled him with such terror, the dish that had sparked their tumultuous journey. Now, watching Nia smile and reach for her collection of dried herbs, he felt only gratitude. "Of course we can, sweetheart," Nia replied, pulling various jars from her wooden spice rack. "Would you like to help me choose the herbs?" Micah hopped down from his stool and hurried to her side. Santiago paused his vegetable chopping to watch them, struck by how natural they looked together. Nia lifted each jar down one by one, letting Micah smell the contents and asking him what he remembered about each one. "This is chamomile," Micah said confidently, pointing to a jar filled with dried flowers. "It helps you sleep and feels like a hug in your tummy." "That's right," Nia praised, running her hand gently over his hair. "And this one?" "Thyme," It makes your chest feel better when you're sick." Santiago's throat tightened as he remembered how many times Micah had been sick before Nia came into their lives. The boy's knowledge of herbs now matched his understanding of hospital routines, but one brought joy, while the other had only brought fear. They worked together to prepare the soup, Nia explaining each step as she went. The kitchen filled with the aroma of simmering vegetables and healing herbs. When they finally sat down at the table, Micah could barely contain his excitement as Nia ladled the steaming soup into bowls. "Now remember," she said, settling into her chair, "each herb in here has its own special job. The rosemary helps your body stay strong, the sage keeps inflammation away, and the thyme helps you breathe easy." Santiago watched her hands move as she spoke, elegant and sure, remembering how he had once seen those same hands as threatening. Now they were healing hands, loving hands, hands that had helped stitch his broken family back together. "And what's the secret ingredient?" Micah asked, spooning up the broth carefully. Nia's eyes met Santiago's across the table as she answered, "Love, of course, just like your grandmother's recipes, right, Santiago?" He nodded, thinking of his own mother's cooking, and how Nia had helped him recreate some of those dishes for Micah. "That's always the most important ingredient," he agreed softly. After lunch, they stepped out onto the back porch to enjoy the mild afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in honey gold light. Micah ran to his swing set, his laughter carrying across the yard. Santiago turned to Nia, who stood watching Micah, with such tenderness it made his heart ache. Taking a deep breath, he spoke the words he'd been holding close to his heart. "You know," he said quietly, "this house, our home, it wouldn't feel right without you anymore. You've brought so much healing here, and not just with your herbs and remedies." Nia's eyes softened as she looked at him, understanding the weight of what he was saying. Together they watched Micah playing in the yard, his movements strong and sure, so different from the fragile child he'd been just months ago. They stood close together on the porch, shoulders touching, as the golden afternoon light wrapped around them like a blessing. In that moment, they were more than three separate people. They were a family restored, strengthened by trust, and finally, completely safe in their love for each other. Micah's laughter rang out again, pure and joyful, a sound that seemed to echo the happiness in all their hearts. The gentle breeze carried the scent of Nia's herb garden, a reminder of how fear had transformed into faith and how healing had grown into love. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."